Well, hi. So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Maureen Heher, and I am the Historical Research Specialist here at the Hartford History Center. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the photograph collection that is within the larger Hartford City Parks Collection. I am going to highlight just a few of the exhibits in our online exhibit, Hartford Springs into Summer, but I'm not going to talk about all of them because I want to leave some discovery for you all, and I hope you'll really enjoy this exhibit. We've had a lot of fun putting it together. The Hartford City Parks Collection contains nearly 2,700 photographs. And when park images from the postcard collection, the historical photo collection, the Department of Engineering collection, and also our postcard collection are factored in, we have probably 3,500 images of the parks. Which images to highlight was probably the most challenging aspect of putting this exhibit together. There are so many wonderful images of winter sports, compelling images of the damage done by floods and hurricanes, particularly in the 30s. There are amazing photos documenting the landscapes before, during, and after the construction of the parks, and also documenting all of the infrastructure within the parks themselves. But since Hartford Springs into Summer is a celebration of the summer to come and hopefully something of a more normal summer, we decided to limit the photos to show how people used the parks during the months of May to September. And we also decided to limit the time period that we were focused on to the first half of the 20th century. So this narrowed focus definitely helped, but it was still very difficult to choose. And in fact, the photo that's on the screen is not in the exhibit, but it's a charming photograph of the Noah Webster School students who were the winners of a field day event. It was a competition between all of the city schools that was held in Elizabeth Park. The Parks Collection photographs tell the story of the history of the parks. A picture is worth 1,000 words, if you will. But the collection also helps to chronicle the social history of the city of Hartford. The parks continually change to meet the changing demands of an ever-changing population. All of the photographs in this collection have stories to tell, just like the storyteller in Colt Park. And again, this photo is also not in the exhibit, and perhaps it's the librarian in me, but I just found it too good to leave out. And I feel that truly it's wonderful to see that and demonstrate that the parks have always been used for things beyond just sporting events. My next slide, these are the tennis courts in Pope Park. And Pope Park opened on Memorial Day. Pope Park was a series of walkways and meadows and drives that allowed the citizens of Hartford the opportunity to commune with nature. And while Pope Park, along with Bushnell, Elizabeth, and Keeney Parks were sort of meticulously designed and curated, the intention was to create natural spaces that seemed to remain undisturbed by man. The tennis courts were the one exception and the only recreational venue in the city, in the park when it opened. And they were also tucked sort of away up in the north corner. Plantings over the seating area, though, sort of provided shade, but also helped the tennis courts to sort of fit into this natural aesthetic. And I just love this photograph. I think it really, it's very charming, and it just really shows what the intention of the Olmsted firm was to, have everything sort of blend in naturally. So these tennis courts were wildly popular right from the get-go, and they were very much in demand. But these tennis courts were definitely not sort of free and accessible to everyone in the public. According to the Parks Department annual report, in 1898, a season's pass to use these tennis courts was $3, which is equivalent to about $95 today. So, and when two people not holding season tickets played, the charge of 5 cents each per set was collected by the attendant. This was cost prohibitive for a large percentage of the population found in the increasingly crowded neighborhoods filled with immigrant and working class families. The But over the next 20 years, the Parks Department really worked to respond to the needs of this changing population. And playgrounds, baseball diamonds, skating ponds, lawn bowling greens, golf courses, soccer fields, a speedway, a cinder track, a curling rink, a hockey rink were all built. And by the early 1920s, the Park Department was overseeing 24 neighborhood and school playgrounds. And also playgrounds were being built within the parks themselves, like these two that are captured here. The one to your left is Riverside Park. It's a merry-go-round in Riverside Park. And the one to the right is Terrace Playground, which was in Pope Park. And I love both of these photographs because they're different in that, obviously the children are playing in Riverside Park. It's an old-fashioned merry-go-round. They would run around and then lift their feet up and spin. And the kids, there are a bunch of them, they don't have their shoes on, and they clearly are very much playing. The Terrace Playground, clearly they collected the children together for a photograph. And so it's a little bit more staged, and they're sitting around the hammock area, but the kids are barefoot. So you can tell that they've been hard at play too. This next two photos are also playgrounds. These two photos actually allow me to highlight one of the challenges of working with photographs like this, historical documents in general. But sometimes we have a lot of information about a photo, and sometimes we have very little. The photograph to the left has a caption on the back, which reads Pavilion Street Playground, August 10, 1922. And it's great. We have a date, we have a place, we have a year, so that's wonderful. Whereas the photo of the children playing on the slide, there's absolutely no information recorded on it at all. We can scour the records, held in the collection, and we can look through the Parks Department annual reports, and that sometimes can give us some clues. But in the case of the Pavilion Street Playground photo, it actually created more questions, because in all of the official records in 1922, there is no mention of a Pavilion Street Playground, but there is a Bellevue Street Playground, which was one of the largest at the time in the city, and was opened in August 1922, which is the date on this photo. And since Bellevue Street and Pavilion Street intersect, we can speculate that perhaps they are one and the same, but we are not in the business of speculating, so we'll have to do a lot more research to be sure. This next slide is an example of some of the documents that are held in the collection. And these are the kinds of documents that help us, figure things out. I love this document, and Jennifer is going to share many more with you, but I had to include this. This is the front and the back cover of a 1921 parks brochure about the parks and playgrounds of Hartford. And the back cover is a list of larger play apparatus located within the parks. And while many common things are listed, like the tall slide, merry-go-round, swings, and hammocks that we just saw in the previous photos, there are a few unusual things listed here, like the oscillator, giant strides, teeter ladders, that all sound like things that would certainly not be allowed in a playground today. I hope with further research, we may identify these play structures in photos so that we can share them with you in the future, because I think it'd be pretty great if we can find what the oscillator looked like. The last group of photographs showed unstructured play, but the City Parks Recreation Department arranged hundreds of activities for all age groups throughout the year. In the 1920s, two of the biggest events for children were athletic meets that were held on the 4th of July and on Labor Day. The activities were restricted to boys and girls under the age of 17, and participants were classified in 3 different groups according to weight. So, nowadays we generally think of children or people, being, in a race, and it's age group categories, but they classified the children in 3 groups by weight, which when you think about it is actually kind of more fair given the disparities in sizes of children at different ages. And, but yet I'm curious, because I have not been able to find how they determined the children's weight. But given the fact that most people probably didn't have a scale in their house, I imagine there must have been a big scale in the park that day, and that they weighed all of the kids who wanted to participate. But again, we'll have to do a little bit more research before we can, be fully sure about this. I love these two photographs because they show very different kinds of races. The kids, the girls are competing in what is called the bean and spoon race. And we all are probably more familiar with an egg and spoon race, but eggs were far too precious to waste on an event like this. So they used beans. And I like the girls are all very, dressed up, and obviously they're very Sunday best. The photo to the left, those are little boys riding on horseback, and there are no saddles. So they're going to race horses through the park without any saddles. And again, I'm not sure that that would be allowed in a park today. Team sports like baseball, football, and hockey grew in popularity during the post-World War I period. I mean, they were popular before, but after World War I, they really grew in popularity. Immigrant populations in Hartford embraced these American games, and they certainly made them their own, but they also brought games with them to Hartford. And the popularity of games like hurling, which is a little bit like lacrosse, Gaelic football, which is similar to rugby, but played with a round ball, and cricket created a demand for even more field space. The caption on the photograph to the left reads, "Irish boys ready for a game of hurling." In 1923, the Parks Department annual report director of James H. Dillon, the director of recreation, stated, "Hurling continued to be popular to the many players who follow the sport. Gaelic had become so interesting to the large number of people who attend all of the games on the weekends that a place on Independence and Labor Day programs was given the sport." There was such a great influence, emphasis during this time period on sort of the Americanization and assimilation of immigrant populations that it's really kind of impressive to have a foreign game get a spot on the 4th of July program. And it just goes to sort of really illustrate the influence that immigrant groups were having on the city. And then, of course, the photo to the right is a cricket team, and I love that photograph. They look also very gentlemanly. And as we know, cricket has played an important role in the history of Hartford for a very long time, and continues to be played here today. So I'm going to switch gears now a little bit. We've been talking about all of the great activities that are in, that are going on in the parks, but obviously a whole lot of work goes into building them, preparing them, and then maintaining them. The Great Depression, obviously, we all know, caused mass unemployment, and Hartford was no exception. There were a tremendous number of unemployed people in the city. To help combat this problem, the welfare department asked the city parks department to provide work for large numbers of unemployed men. So the welfare department would pay their benefits, but the men would work on projects within the parks. And this is a great photo of the unemployed building the Goodwin Park Pond in 1932. If you look closely, I mean, there's obviously the tractor in front, but in the back, there is still a wagon being pulled by animals. I would assume maybe horses, but it's not particularly clear. And just look at the sheer number of people, the workforce, the manpower that went into, building things during this time period. And so I really love this photo because I think it's really demonstrates the level of work, the amount of work that went into creating these things that we sort of take for granted today. The other really interesting part, one of the really interesting things about this photograph collection within the Parks collection is that the documentation of both the unemployed workers doing work, but then also the WPA work. After 1935, the Works Progress Administration was created, and many projects in the parks were completed by WPA workers. And the photographic documentation of all of this work is really quite tremendous, and it's probably worthy of an exhibit in and of itself, because there are just so many photographs and they're really amazing. And then I have one last slide, and this is dancing at Labor Day, on Labor Day at Colt Park in 1921. This was the last event on the Labor Day activities schedule. It's the way they closed out the holiday and closed out the season. It was dancing for all in the afternoon. That's the caption on the reverse of this photograph. The dance pavilion at Colt Park was extraordinarily popular. There was dancing all summer long, every evening except Sundays and Mondays. 200,000 tickets for admittance to the dance pavilion were purchased during the summer of 1921. Now, selling 200,000 tickets is impressive in any time, but in 1921 to sell 200,000 tickets for the dance pavilion certainly helps to emphasize just how popular this venue was. That is the end of my presentation because I don't want to give away too much about the exhibit. I hope you'll dive in and really take a look at these photographs. I really enjoyed pulling them together. They're really interesting and they're quite beautiful. And it's just a tiny little snippet of what this collection holds. So I'm hoping that maybe this is the first in a series of exhibits that we'll be putting together. And so I want to thank you for joining us. And I am now going to hand you over to Jennifer Sharp, the Hartford History Center archivist. And again, thanks for joining me.
Okay, Hartford Parks have been in existence since the creation of Bushnell Park in the 1850s. Theodore Worth was the first parks superintendent hired in 1896. This list of parks superintendents, directors, and supervisors is the best I've been able to pull together. The hierarchy has changed over the years. In the early days, superintendent was head of the department. By the 1950s and 60s, as you can see with Everett Pyle, the superintendent reported to the parks director. Collection spans the tenures of Theodore Worth to Everett Pyle. Those whose papers we hold are highlighted. We don't currently have any records from the 1970s, and most of what we have from the 1980s relates to proposed improvements to Bushnell Park. I was looking for something completely different when I found the article shown there on the left about the discovery of the Parks collection in the early 1980s. I say discovery because someone at some point in time knew it was there. Two city councilmen came upon it while they were poking around the fourth floor of City Hall. Initially, the city council voted to send the collection to the state library. Through the efforts of a couple of HBL folks, the material came to the Hartford collection a couple of years later. Since then, several people have worked on the collection in a variety of ways. A portion of it has been processed, and a finding aid is available on our archives space platform. Glass negatives have been scanned and may be found on the Connecticut Digital Archive. The portion not yet included in the finding aid is what I have been working with lately. Much of the work that has previously been done leaves me with questions I will likely never have answers to. These invoices originally mixed in with other material. This is labeled as Mr. X's papers, but wouldn't Mr. Y have created it? And there's a lot of just general head scratching going on. My goal with working with what I'm calling the new material, and it's not really new, it's mostly new to me, is to make it available and discoverable without doing any further harm to the original order of the collection. I have already refolded everything, as you can see here, and am in the process of grouping together the folders by superintendent or director. Within the folders, if there is, for example, a lone piece from Wales Dixon in a James Dillon folder, I'm not going to move it. Most of what I will share with you today is new material, concentrating on items that fit within the framework of the exhibit. My hope is to share the variety of material available for research, the depth of the record keeping, how parks and park activities were woven into other aspects of Hartford's culture and some of the people who influenced it all. Record keeping was very well done in the early days of Hartford Parks. Theodore Worth was superintendent in 1898 when these plants were purchased for Colt Park, though I do not know if he is the one who kept the ledger. We see the number of plants purchased, the Latin name, the cost per item, and the amount spent. The left page shows the North Grove, and the right page shows South of Park Street. This image doesn't look like much, but if you wanted to recreate the Parks Department of 1906, this would be your guide. There are 53 sections of inventory listed here. The Parks Department documented every tool, acre of land, animal, you name it, that was under their purview. 1906 was the year George Parker succeeded Theodore Worth. Parker came to Hartford 10 years earlier to be the superintendent of Keeney Park. Most of George Parker's papers have already been made available. Parker and his work were known countrywide. If Theodore Worth laid the foundation, George Parker built the house. We have pages and pages of his writings, correspondence, and notes. As part of my research to better understand the context of the collection, I found the following remembrance in the Hartford Current. Wherever Hartford is known, and we like to think that is wherever there is civilization, its parks are known and praised for their practical benefits as well as their beauty. In the development of the system, which has added much to the reputation of the capital of Connecticut, the man who died yesterday had played a leading part. A tireless worker, an enthusiastic worker, a faithful worker. The extent and value of the labors of Mr. Parker in beautifying the parks and making them the people's own can hardly be overestimated. The parks were not, in Mr. Parker's mind, merely things of beauty to be looked at, to be admired, to figure in photographic reproductions, but were for common, everyday use by the people because they owned them. He was interested in everything which had a bearing on the growth, betterment, and prosperity of Hartford, and he was never without ideas as to the improvement of the city and the way to make it an even better place to live in and an even better place for the children whom he loved. What the Current did not mention was that Parker appears to have kept every piece of paper that ever crossed his desk. Part of the reason it takes so long to prepare a collection like this for research is that we archivists have to understand the collection in order to present it to you in a way that will help you locate information. One day I found this bill from Warfield and Company, and a few days later I found George Parker's correspondence ledgers. See the note penciled in on top that matches up with the bottom entry in the correspondence ledger. You never know what you will find in a collection. Most of what I have reviewed paints a picture of the park's superintendents working hard for the masses, providing free recreation for all. So when I found this invitation in George Parker's files for a playground in the West End, I couldn't imagine why someone would have sent it to him. His own children were grown, so he wouldn't have a use for it personally. And pay to play seemed contrary to the image I had conjured up. I figured he must really have saved everything. What caused me to challenge my own thoughts was when I turned the page and saw that Mr. Parker was among those on the committee. I haven't had time to do any more research, but I'm curious about this. The invitation is not dated, so I looked up the Harold B. Whitmore family. They were first listed on Kenyon Street in the 1915 city directory. Incidentally, Mr. Whitmore's father was a parks commissioner. When talking with people who don't know what an archivist does, I often tell them I read other people's diaries for a living. This page is from George Parker's diary in 1906. He only used it through February 3rd, but it still gives us a glimpse into the work the Parks Department performed during the winter. We also have several similar volumes kept in the 1950s and 60s, either by Everett Peister or Everett Pyle, noting the daily parks work. Everett Peister spent decades working on the gardens at Elizabeth Park. He began his career in Hartford as a landscape architect in 1925 and retired at the department's highest post. Peister was very active with the American Rose Society, including being a consulting rosarian. Over the years, he tested out new rose varieties at Elizabeth Park and corresponded with others as to the results. The first list, from 1903-1904, is before his time, but is included among his papers, along with other rose documentation. The second and third lists are from 1939 and 1951. Peister's knowledge of the rose garden surpassed that of his supervisor. So when George Hollister spoke on WDRC in 1934, the text was written by Peister. There are a couple of histories such as this within the collection. We don't have too many objects in the collection, but this notebook emphasizes the variety of ways records have been kept. Tree diameters were obviously typed and not handwritten with what I'm sure are lead pencils in this notebook. I'm also intrigued by this black object, which is labeled Harvey and Lewis, suggesting it was meant to hold your eyeglasses. When talking about preparations for the summer, the refectories, a fancy word for snack shacks, are a great place to start. There doesn't seem to be an indication as to which park this refectory served, but I think ice cream was likely a top seller at all of them. We have many pages of refectory bill listings. This is a great source of information. You can learn who was doing business with the city at the time, which vendors they used for which items, and the cost of fuels, such as natural gas and coal. For food historians, we can determine what the most popular candy was, and whether they purchased more ladyfingers or macaroons. Working with this collection has been, in large part, about making connections that can help us better understand a variety of social, economic, and political aspects of 20th century Hartford. One of the more interesting finds for me was the logbook showing Emil Thurston's wages. Yes, that is Emil on the lawnmower. When I posted the photo on our social media a year or two ago, I was able to find Emil's home address in the city directory. Now I have an understanding as to his wages. And in addition to just riding a lawnmower, he was also a blacksmith and machinist. Play among the department's records is often documented in lists and statistics. The holidays were huge. Arbor Day, May Day, Memorial Day, Flag Day, 4th of July, and Labor Day were all celebrated. Here you can see the schedule of events for July 4th, 1920. We have a note on one of the first pages of the exhibit that we recognize our collection has gaps and that not all of Hartford residents are reflected in the images. While we have photos of all sorts of white children participating in competitions and activities, we don't have any photos of the people of color who played a band concert at Keeney Park. We also know there were Asians in Hartford in 1920. They are listed in the city directories along with the businesses many of them owned. Again, no images in the parks collection. Kids were not competing for ribbons or trophies in 1920. Win the 50-yard dash? Take home a strip of bacon. three-legged race, you both get a watermelon. Ham, chicken, flour, and coffee were among other prizes. We have all sorts of daily attendance numbers for summer activities and parks usage. School gardens were a very popular activity. It was a joint program between the Parks Department and the Board of School Visitors. In this photo, you can see the teacher in her straw hat, which the current tells us was ubiquitous with these gardens. School gardens were initiated at Riverside Park by the Civic Club and were later transferred to the school system. The program began in 1904. The children received lessons and had their own garden plot to plant and maintain. Vegetables grown included radishes, lettuce, squash, beets, turnips, string beans, and tomatoes. The biggest issue with the Riverside gardens was spring flooding, which delayed the start of the program each year. Children participating at Riverside Park came from the Brown, Second North, Arsenal, and St. Patrick's schools. In classes of about 25, they alternated attending, usually 2 days one week and 3 days the next week. I have not been able to determine what type of work W.B. Hatch was performing, but I like that they had a mileage allowance, having their car fare reimbursed. July 27, 1907, Current wrote, "One might think there would be considerable trouble from those of the east side who might break into the garden when no one is there, say at night, and carry away some of the vegetables. But such a thing has never happened and is not expected. In fact, the gardens have done much to better that end of Riverside Park, for all the rough element that used to congregate there has left of their own free will and have not been there since, evidently proving that they do not thrive in or like prosperous localities." Those not gardening might have made their way to Pope Park, which had hundreds of children using the playground each day, and probably as many in the wading pool too. The wading pool photograph somehow landed in the engineering collection, I think making it the only engineering photo to feature a dog. Also popular at Pope Park was the outdoor gym. The gym was installed in 1902 with a delay due to a lumber shortage. It was available for use by the children attending vacation schools, which was a cross between a summer school and a playground camp, during the morning. And in the late afternoon, older boys and men, who, as it was said in the Current, are confined during the day in shops and factories, would have their chance to use the equipment. At all times, there was an instructor present. All of these numbers were collected, as we do here at the library today, to make a case for the importance of maintaining services. Written in 1913, most likely by George Parker, states, "Many of our people go to the seashore and the mountains during the summer months, but more remain in the city, and the parks should offer the best substitute for the invigoration of seashore and mountain outings." That they are doing just that is shown by their rapid increase in attendance, from 50,000 in 1906 to 660,000 in 1912. And the Park Department is expecting 900,000 attendants upon the park activities during the present year. Why were there so many people using the parks? This was a time when Hartford's population was growing by thousands each year. There were 91,000 people in 1905. In 1910, the population had increased to nearly 114,000. It was up to 138,000 in 1915, before peaking at 158,000 in 1918. In addition to typed notes, we have numerous ledgers with handwritten data. Many of them are filled with financial information, but we also have tennis attendance at Pope Park, the leaves being picked up at small parks, and the mode of arrival at Keeney Park. I know this is light, but it mentions carriages, pedestrians, autos, bicycles, horseback. I am grateful to Leah in our digital library lab for scanning these ledgers for me. They're not covering today how each park was acquired, in part because most of the documents related to that are among the city council papers. However, I happened upon this letter while processing the new material. If you look through the finding aid collection, you will see there are many papers and records relating to the Keeney Park trustees. Keeney land was a park kept by the trustees for many years before it officially became city property. This letter was sent to the Parks Commissioners by the City Corporation Council, authorizing them to accept the deed for the park land. Today, golf courses, both Keeney and Goodwin, are often used by out-of-towners, and that might have been the case back in the 20s and 30s too. What I found interesting about this letter is the expectation that golf was a way former mayors would continue to be involved in the life of the city. By chance, I recently found Alan Hamilton's voter registration card in our voter records collection. I removed his date information, but this is another example of how our collections are interwoven. Bits of information about who worked and played at Goodwin or any other park may be found in a variety of places. As Maureen mentioned, WPA could be an exhibit in and of itself. We have records of people hired for all sorts of WPA projects, including men working at Rocky Ridge Park and clearing the Arboretum at Patterson Park. Photos we have included in the exhibit show men fixing park paths. This map is from the 1938-1939 annual report of the WPA Recreation Division of the Parks Department. It is great to see all of the facilities and all of the offerings in one place. Among the statistics shared in this report, on July 4th, 1938, 5,000 children took part in playground track and field meets. There were 170 entries in the annual swim meet at Colt Park, with 4,000 spectators. Only 74 people played badminton. 154,228 played checkers. Different building plans and specifications may be found throughout the collection. In 1939, Comfort Station was built in Elizabeth Park. If you zoom in, you will see there is a fee to use the facilities. This building still stands and last year was converted into a visitor center. Also standing at Elizabeth Park are the original greenhouses. On the left, we have the first page of the contract, and on the right, we have the building specifications. It is my understanding that the greenhouses are due to be renovated soon. We have similar documents for other parks, including the tennis courts at Pope Park and work at Riverside Park. The Park River Conduit continues to be a source of discussion in Hartford today. You can see the river winding its way, the original river, along the top of the park, and how the conduit, shown here in blue, diverted it through. When you look at the detail on the map, there are two gas stations right alongside the river. One of them I found listed in the city directory, and I was actually able to find sign for the other in the engineering department's photos. Maureen has read through some of the engineering department's annual reports, and because they supervised the work done by the Army Corps of Engineers, there's detailed information about the conduit project. A Charter Oak. What would a Hartford history talk be without mention of this venerated state symbol? These days, we know that the beloved tale of the candles going out and the Constitution mysteriously ending up in a tree is a bit of a tall tale. However, the fall of the tree in 1856 was a big deal. Colt's band played funeral dirges at the fallen tree. Paintings and poems were created in its memory. Everything that could be carved from it was. In short, everyone wanted a piece of the action. Over the years, scions were sent around the world by the Parks Department. Mrs. Hodges' letter evokes the enthusiasm people had for this tree. As you can see, she wanted Mr. Hollister to treat those who made this possible to a cigar. A Hartford Current story from June 1909 relates that President Taft would be visiting Norwich on the 4th of July. And the gentleman entertaining the president requested a scion for him. The board voted to send him one. While we're talking about the demise of the Charter Oak tree, we'll take a quick detour to the cemeteries. The cemeteries went from being under the control of the City Council to the control of the Parks Department in 1908. Because the deeds for the plots are recorded in the town and city clerk's land records, this is another area where information may be found in both collections. An extra wrinkle I will point out, Northwood Cemetery is home to Hartford's Soldiers Field. The cemetery is actually in Windsor, so the deeds are recorded in Windsor's land records. We're going to wrap up with a spotlight on Batterson Park. Batterson has a unique history when compared with the other parks, which is detailed in both the Parks Department collection and the City and Town Clerk archives. The land was formerly under the control of the city's water board. The water wasn't considered the right quality for drinking, and it was turned over to the Parks Department in 1928. When the Metropolitan District Commission took over the water system, all of the water board's land, with the exception of Batterson Park, was transferred to that organization. The park comprises several parcels, and in 1937, an arboretum was proposed for some of the land, basically across the street from West Hartford Reservoir on Route 4. The next year, a WPA group was clearing and preparing that land. In 1938, the City Council voted to buy 22 acres of land from Stanley Works to protect the park. By 1945, the wooden structure, shown above, was in great need of replacement. George Hollister had to apply to the War Board for permission to rebuild. The concrete replacement structure remains today. In the 1950s, a few of the outlying parcels were sold off, and we have documentation about that as well. Bids were received from 5 contractors for the new structure. As is the case with most municipal projects, the department was looking for ways to keep costs down. What I found interesting is the option of removing doors from the women's dressing rooms. Or one of the contractors, this actually would have increased the price. I've mentioned the Arboretum a couple of times and wanted to share this map with you. One of my favorite finds among the new material. Farmington Avenue, Route 4, runs along the bottom of the map, and you can still see one of the gates when you travel by. The map shows pastures, forests, and meadows. I haven't figured out yet, other than perhaps a lack of funds, why it did not come to fruition. These kids are playing at Riverside Park, which has also made a splash in the news lately. We want to give a shout out to Riverfront Recapture, which recently finalized purchase of land. Okay, well, thank you all for spending your lunch hour with us today. And you can feel free to email us if you have any further questions, hhc@helct.org. We'll get to both myself and Maureen. And I hope you have a great day and share the exhibit with your friends. Thank you.